Welcome to the Golf Improvement Podcast, episode 191.
Welcome to the podcast for golf lovers and enthusiasts who are looking to take their games to new heights. Dedicated to custom club fitting, short game improvement, and effective practice to improve your golf game. This is the Golf Improvement Podcast with your host, Tony Wright.
Hello, this is Tony Wright from Game Improvement Golf in Oak Ridge, Tennessee with the Golf Improvement Podcast, dedicated to sharing useful information on professional club fitting, short game improvement, and effective practice techniques. I create exceptional golf clubs. You shoot lower scores. For a long time, I've been fascinated by the concept of using strokes gained analysis to understand how to identify areas to improve my personal golf game. About 7 months ago, I started using Peter Sanders' shot-by-shot app to track my golf shots and identify the most important and most obvious ways to improve my game. I might not have liked what I learned from this, but as I contemplate what it told me, it was exactly right on. So a few weeks ago, I asked Peter if he'd be interested in doing an interview with me. And lucky for me and for all of you, he agreed. I learned way more than I expected to learn about Peter's role in the history of strokes gained golf analysis, and I think you'll find what he shares in this interview valuable to help you improve your personal golf games.
Taking your game to new heights. www.gameimprovementgolf.com.
Hello, this is Tony Wright with episode 191 of the Golf Improvement Podcast. Our guest today is Peter Sanders, an expert in golf strokes gained analysis. He's president and founder of Shot by Shot, a website and actually standalone golf improvement app. He's been a professional advisor to Golf Digest, to TrackMan, and interestingly, most recently, to the GPS tracking system Arccos Golf, where he's giving them some advice on how to integrate strokes gained into what they do. But, let me tell you a little mini story just the last couple days, right? And I'm sure this will come up. So I help coach. I'm a assistant coach for a junior college golf team. And I hand them out cards every time they play in tournaments that say first putt distance and number of putts. And I calculate strokes gained for them I have a little spreadsheet I did. But invariably, almost every time they say to me, "Hey, coach, I had 31 putts." Nah, not so good. "Hey, coach, I had 29 putts. Boy, I putted pretty well." And I said, "Hey, guys, there's more out there." And it's interesting, too, that even if you just look at the cards and you see where, they have negative strokes gained, miss a 6-footer, miss an 8-footer, it just all jumps out there when you look at that stuff that way. But so strokes gained is such a powerful way to do things. And your app is neat. I've been using it when I play for, I think, 3 or 4 months. So, Peter, thanks for...
Great.
Yeah, I like it. I really like it a lot. It's very simple and easy to use.
Thank you.
Well, it's fascinating for me when I got on your website to learn about, what you're doing and what you've done, that there's like a 30-year history of strokes gained analysis. Back when you kind of first started playing golf. So talk about what sort of started all these things for you, which is sort of related to having an analytical background, right? Back in 1989.
Yeah. Thank you for that introduction. It's very nice. I always say that analyzing putting by the number of putts would be like balancing your checkbook based on the number of checks without regard to the amount. But that falls on deaf ears now because nobody balances a checkbook anymore. But anyway, and your question is such a good one, how I got into this, and it's really a three three big things that happened to me in my life that led me to do this. And the first is I had a very, very strong background in math. Not because I was smart, not because I was gifted, because I was blessed with a father who was an engineer, you'll relate to that, who was a fanatic about math. He thought the world, revolved around math. And a C in any math course in our house was an F, and demanded rigorous, work to get it up. So, the long and the short of it, he made sure that I was very proficient in math, especially algebra. Okay, that's number one. Number two, I go to college, and because I'd done really well on the math SATs, nobody knows what that is anymore, do they? I was talked into registering my first year for an advanced calculus course. And I thought, I'm really good at math. I took calculus in high school. Well, it didn't take me long at all to know that I did not want to know any more about calculus, and the only people that did were rocket scientists, and that I had no use for it. So I was able to jump out and get into a course called Probability and Statistics, and I loved it. And the third thing, when I got out of the Army, I went to work for a company called General Reinsurance. We were like Lloyd's of London. We did insurance of high risks for insurance companies. We leveled out their experiences by taking away the catastrophes and that. And I was given an unusual task to evaluate basically a frequency problem. I won't go into the details, and it involved frequencies of losses that in household appliances in Europe, and it was way beyond my ability to evaluate all the types of appliances, all the manufacturer's warranties, all these things. And I expressed this frustration to a friend with whom I played basketball in my company, who was in the IT department. He said, I'll lend you an analyst. And I said, great. And this young woman, wheeled a computer into my office and basically camped out there for months while we created what were the original Excel spreadsheets. I'd never heard of anything like that. I'd never used a computer. and eventually we created a pricing model that took over that industry, and it was a kind of a watershed for my company, and we made a lot of money in that industry, and I got a lot of attention, some of which I didn't need. And so then at the same time, I joined a golf club, a great golf course. And my first handicap was a 14. I'd never had a handicap. I had played golf, but not seriously. And so I decided I wanted to improve. And well, how do you improve? You keep track of statistics like they talked about in Golf Digest. Did you hit the fairway? Did you hit the green? How many putts did you have? And I very quickly came to the conclusion that was all myopic, one-dimensional answers to a multi-dimensional game. And I said, you know what, I could do better than this. I could do what I did for General Reinsurance and create a model of how the game is played at scratch, and we could compare each shot, start and finish position to that model and come up with some real analysis. And I talked to my wife. She said, yeah, quit your job and go for it.
Wow. Yeah.
And that's what I did.
Wow.
And for years, people told me I was stupid and that nobody would understand it.
Well, and, there's still a lot of people that don't understand it, but there's sure a lot more that do now, right?
Yeah. But so many people don't. I know even the announcers on TV that talk about it, they have no idea where it's coming from and how it's done.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and, that's a good segue into, kind of a little introduction question. Anything where you talk about strokes gained, ought to talk with a little bit of discussion about kind of defining what it is. So, maybe a little bit of discussion there.
Yeah. It is a way to evaluate the strokes either gained or lost by each shot. And then you can put in each facet together and really tell someone exactly where they're losing the most shots to par in every facet of their game. And it's science, and it works.
And it's, it was fascinating. I don't know why this hit me yesterday, but I sat down and looked at the cards that I get from the kids, right? And it all adds up, little pieces. I mean, if you just take putting as an example, right? And it's, I do strokes gained for them relative to a scratch golfer because they're junior college kids, and some of them are close to scratch, some not. But missing a 6-foot putt is, relative to a scratch golfer, I don't know, I'm just going to pick a number, kind of a negative 0.6, and all of that adds up in the end point about where you are relative to a typical scratch golfer in terms of how you putt. And using your app, for example, I've had some rounds where I was a +4 relative to what I'm striving for, a +3 handicap, but a lot of times not. But it's all those little pieces that really add up, right?
Yeah, and it really does work. And it, for your listeners, first of all, they could go to my website shotbyshot.com, and I have short, 4 or 5 minute videos on the history of strokes gained and strokes gained explained, where it gives some good examples of various holes and how it's calculated. But it's basically the value, what I call the down end value. Every position on the golf course, I've created a model of how many strokes it takes the scratch golfer to hole out from every position on the golf course. And so you get the value of the starting position less the value of the ending position minus the number of strokes it took to get there. And it all works.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. You talked a little bit early, right on about, an analogy for putts. Maybe talk about a couple areas, some other traditional golf statistics, and where they just don't tell you what the truth is, like, fairways hit or greens in regulation, although I know from your website, greens in regulation is not a bad thing to be able to do. Yeah,
no, yeah. And yes, I do that. This is what made me want to do this. And the traditional stats are one-dimensional. They're either yes, no, or they're one-dimensional stats. And the one thing that I think they do the worst is that they do not include any of the downside of the game, the mistakes, the errors that I've found do more to influence the scoring at every level of the game than any of the great shots or the average shots. And so the game is really about, as somebody said, controlling your foul balls. But so fairways hit it's a yes, no. And yes, it is good to hit a fairway. But what about the relative severity of all the misses? And as you know, in shot by shot, we have 5 miss categories. One of them is good. So you miss a fairway, but maybe you're in the first cut. You have a really good opportunity to accomplish your next goal. There's a poor miss. It's going to take a great shot to accomplish the next goal, but it's not an error. And then the 3 errors: a no shot, behind a tree, under a bush, requires an advancement, and then penalty and the lost ball and out of bounds. So those, and I work with tour players, they don't get any of that from tour stats. All they get is, did you hit the fairway or not? And so they and I have a story which I'll tell later about, they're amazed at the cost of their errors. Greens in regulation, it's a good thing. It means that your long game has been proficient enough that you got to the green in regulation, and it's always a birdie putt. But I remember when I was keeping track, and all there was tour information. When I was hitting 3 greens around and the tour was averaging 11, I'd go, gee, that's depressing. And then take short game, saves. Yeah, that's a good thing. But it's really 2 facets of the game. It's the short game shot and then putting. What about how close you hit it to the hole and whether you missed the green with it, made an error? So there's we've done it differently, and in shot by shot, people get the opportunity to record their errors in a positive way.
And for example, with me, I might, one of the areas where I have a big opportunity for improvement is like roughly 125 yards. And sometimes I might hit a 125-yard shot 30 or 40 feet from the hole, right? Well, That has a big effect on what's going to happen. Not that you should be firing at every hole from 125 yards, but probably, at least if you're measuring against maybe a 3 or 4 handicap, they're typically hitting it a little bit closer than that, right?
Yeah, from that distance. Yeah, there was several years ago, there was a big uproar about proximity to the hole. The whole game, especially at the professional level, was proximity to the hole. And I had a cute story, and I don't tell many stories about the people that I work with, but Zach Johnson is, he's become a good friend, and he knows this story. His entourage was saying, he needed to go for pins. He needed better proximity. And then they turned to me in one of our meetings and said, "What do you think?" And I had an opinion, but I didn't want to say it without support. So I said, "I'll do a study." So I studied the entire year before on proximity to the hole and what the top 10 players in scoring and in approach strokes gained, how relative was their proximity to the hole. And bottom line, I came that it was much more important to hit a green than it was to strive for proximity and miss an extra green. And then I ended it with, does anybody in the room, and this was, back talking to Zach and his entourage, does anybody know who had the best proximity to the hole for the PGA Tour last season? And nobody did. And nobody did, because it was someone that was, ranked 120th on tour and had made no money. So I said, how good is that? But anyway.
What a great story. No, that's a great story. So share a little bit about what the analysis approach in Shot by Shot in the app does, how golfers apply it, and then what using it helps, what using it gets them to the best kind of help. And you have a couple particular things in it that I think are pretty neat, relative handicaps, and for different categories like driving and putting, and then number 1 improvement opportunity, I think is such a valuable way of applying the app.
Yeah. So I made a couple of notes on this. I think, your listeners could very easily register for our 1-round free trial, and therefore they get to see what is required in the data collection. And we are less than 30% of all the new competitors, because they make people put in every shot. And I realized early on, nobody wants to put in every shot. It turns around the golf into a workplace. But and then they can decide whether to use it or not. But I'm proud to say that we have over 70% of people who register for our free trial purchase the program. But anyway, then, what it does is it gives you a relative handicap in each facet of the game. The strokes gained number is an abstract. And without some perspective, it really doesn't mean that much. So I came up with early on, when I had a big enough database, that I could put a relative handicap on the strokes gained numbers. And so you'll see, I have never worked with anyone in the 30 plus years that has the same handicap in every facet of the game. Everybody has strengths and weaknesses. And when you can point them out and show how many shots they're losing, it can really motivate somebody to focus their improvement efforts, and then they're going to improve more quickly. So my goal when I created this was to give answers, not regurgitate a bunch of numbers and percentages and let people work on it for their own. So I wanted the number one priority, and that is where a player is losing the most shots on average, not necessarily to par, but to the average strokes lost by his target handicap group. If you just do it to par, the major facets are always going to be your number one priority. It'll never be sand shots because there's not enough sand shots in a game. It'll rarely be chipping and pitching. But in our case, it can be sand if you're that much worse in the sand than your target handicap group. So we point out the number one priority, and people can focus their efforts however they do, and then work on it, and then see the improvement. Then they select a new target, and go about the process again.
Yeah, and working to improve those. Yeah. I like what you said about, I mean, if you had just pumped out all the strokes gained numbers and stuff, it would be like, unless they are very analytical, it would go over a lot of people's heads, but that's not what the real value is. I know when I'm putting the data into the app, one of the things that I like the most is it causes me to think a little bit more about my game. And you know, that's compared to putting something in a notebook. I mean, I would say in the past, I have, I might create a notebook and say for each, round, this thought, that thought. But it puts it in a little bit different perspective when it's in an app like that and you see those different relative handicap areas. What other typical things do you see where people have given you feedback about the value that they got from using shot by shot?
Yeah, I get a lot of good feedback because most people don't email you and say your product sucks. I get a lot of really good feedback, and there's stories of significant improvement. One of the best things, I happened to do this, a few months ago. I looked at all the people and how many rounds they'd turned in over the years, and I have a group of people that I emailed each of the top 10 that have turned in, hundreds and hundreds of rounds over a lot of years, and they're just so loyal to the product. But I think the best feedback that we get is participation. In 2021, 457 rounds were entered every single day.
Oh my!
And that is, to me, tremendously gratifying. It's easy to use, and the reward for doing it is, I think, great.
That is a pretty amazing number. Yeah. Wow. Well, yeah. You did know, you talked about working with Zach Johnson, and I know you work with some other tour pros. Maybe a few insights from working with people at that level, and then any other insights about interactions with golfers who play a little bit more for recreation.
Yeah. The first player with whom I worked was when I just started the business, and I made a presentation to Golf Digest, and the head of the Golf Digest schools just grabbed it and said, "I love this." He was a teaching pro who Golf Digest hired her, and he sent me down to Sea Island to work with the Sea Island instructors, and Chuck Cook was there, and I mean, it was the who's who. And I made a presentation. Well, one of them, and I can't remember his name, this is killing me, but it was a long time ago, worked with Davis Love, and he had Davis Love use the program. Davis Love's brother was his caddy. He would fill out my scorecards and mail them to me. This is way before the internet.
Yeah.
And then I'd do the analysis, and I would send it along to his coach. And it was really, and I think I worked with Davis for 3 years. And then his brother quit caddying for him and moved on to course architecture or something. And of course, Davis Love wasn't going to do it himself. And at the same time, he had gotten to number 2 on tour, just behind Freddie Couples. But and then, you know, Zach, I'm on my 12th or 13th year with him. He is a delightful human being, and you know, just I mean, he's so impressive. I look up to him, and he's a lot younger than I am. But I've had a lot of good, you know, times. The meetings that we have, you know, once a year. Sometimes we do it twice a year. But I had one story that I love. It's one of my favorites. I don't tend to tell people who I'm working with or attach stories to anybody, because I look at, maybe it's invasion of privacy. But I was working with a young tour player, and he was barely hanging on. He made $500,000, which you think is a lot, but it's not. And he was, you know, barely hanging on in the first year. And then the second year, it was like a redo. He made about $500,000. And I was so frustrated at the end of the second year. He and his coach were not paying attention to what I was telling them. So I thought I'd take a different approach. Unsolicited, I did a study of exactly what his problem was. He was making too many driving errors. He was a very long hitter, and as far as he was concerned, that was the game. And he was not paying attention to what I was telling him of the percentage of driving errors and what it was costing him. So I did a financial review of how it was costing him, and I said to him, if you could simply reduce your driving errors to the average of the tour. You don't even have to be better than everybody else. Just get down to the average of the tour. You will double your income. And he did it. The next season, he came out and he started, you know, when we had talked about this, I said, you know, how about Tiger and his 2-iron? You know, you don't always have to hit driver, and it's not always how far. And, you know, who am I to be telling these people this? But that's what I see. Well, he doubled his income the first third of the season, and he tripled his income for the year by just controlling his driving errors.
Wow. That's awesome. Well, it's neat to be able to have a tool in your pocket that allows you to give that kind of advice. So that's cool.
Well, yeah. And another funny thing about Zach, I've been working with Zach for, I don't know, 3 years or so, and he knew me well, and you know, because we'd get together, it was fun, and I'd spend hours in a presentation of, you know, all the back and forth with all the people. It's really, really fun. So he is leading the players that year, and one of the writers goes up to him on the range and says, "I understand you have a statistical analysis guy who's really helping you and all that. Who is it?" And Zach said, "I can't remember his name." Because I guess he felt, as Mike Bender said, he felt you were his secret sauce. Yeah. And he didn't want everybody else having it.
Oh my gosh, that's great. That's good. Well, this has really been great today. I'm glad I jumped out to ask you to do this, and I've been thinking about doing it for a long time. Share some final words to golfers to help them, any other specific things about just helping them to understand the value of using an approach like shot by shot.
Yeah, I sort of thought through this for myself, and I have been on this journey, from a 12 handicap to a much better golfer. And what I found was the game becomes exponentially more fun and more rewarding the better you play it. And it's not that hard if you figure out what you do well and what you don't do well and focus on what needs improvement. It's not that hard.
Boy, I can't wait for that part. Well, and I'm starting this year to play a little bit more at age almost 73, and my thing is to get to the point of shooting my age once in a while. That would be a lot of fun. So.
Yeah, I'm in the same boat with you there, and I got a lot of work to do.
Oh, yeah, I do. But I do know the things that I need to do, too. So,
yeah,
well, this has been really great. I'm going to put a link in the show notes to the Shot by Shot website. I may put a specific link to the videos you talked about, but also, and you don't post, I don't think I've seen, a lot of recent blog posts, but you did some really great blog posts. At least a few years ago that I thought were just excellent, and that, they're still relevant. So people can look back at some of those too, and get a lot of neat information from them.
Yeah, thank you. I enjoyed doing that. I got lazy, and I would watch the tournaments, and nothing would jump out to me. And
yeah.
So I always wrote those because I saw something that I thought was, first of all, in my realm, because I won't do anything that it's not what I should be talking about, and that I could lend some real insight.
Yeah, and I think they really did, and they're all connected to everything that's in Shot by Shot, I believe.
Yeah,
pretty much. Yeah. Well, thanks for the time today. Hang in here for just a minute afterwards, and it was a real pleasure to get to talk with you and let you share a lot of things with people today.
The Golf Improvement Podcast is sponsored by Tony Wright and Game Improvement Golf. Tony creates exceptional golf clubs. You shoot lower scores.
Thanks, Peter, for providing some interesting insights on how you started in 1989 to use what we now call strokes gained analysis, and how you took that knowledge to create the shot-by-shot approach to helping golfers understand how they can improve their games. During the interview, it blew me away when you said you get 457 shot-by-shot analyses inputs daily from subscribers to the app. And I also found by looking at your website that there have now been more than 670,000 rounds submitted to Shot by Shot. I put links in the show notes to Peter's Shot by Shot website, but also to the page on his site where you can look at a lot of great instructional videos related to strokes gained analysis. After the interview, Peter made a very kind offer for anyone interested in starting to use Shot by Shot. If you decide to pay to use the apps, and in the comments for applying note my name, Tony Wright, Peter will give you an additional 3 months added onto your yearly subscription. A very kind offer from him for a tool that I know can help you get a lot more enjoyment on the golf course. My shout out today is not a golf one. This coming week, my wife Diane and I celebrate 25 years of marriage. I'm very blessed to have her as my partner and companion. And every once in a while, she even says that sometimes she might be interested in playing some golf. I know this guy who can create a great set of golf clubs for her. I'm one very lucky man. A reminder that there is a Support Game Improvement Golf link in the show notes for this podcast. And if you can provide some support, that will be greatly appreciated. Contributions are continuing to come in to help me move toward my $4,000 goal for upgrading my website and podcasting computer. Thanks. Well, that's it for today. In 2 weeks, I'm working on 2 new great interview prospects to bring to all of you to help you to play your best golf. Until then, take care. God bless Ukraine, and God bless America.
Game Improvement Golf, your source of information and inspiration to become an exceptional golfer now. www.gameimprovementgolf.com